Our next presenter has a BS in biology with honors from Brown University. He attended the PhD program at the University of California, San Francisco in molecular biology and biochemistry. Rob's passion is to empower people with scientific understanding of how they interact with their DNA. He has given talks on gene expression and health and longevity around the country and in Japan, China, the Philippines, and Australia. So we are very blessed to have him here. Rob is currently director of the veterinarian services at the Oregon Tiger Sanctuary, a non-profit exotic animal sanctuary. So one of the people with the biggest hearts I know, my good friend and colleague, please give a warm welcome to Robert Nagato Needleman.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here at the Longevity Summit. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Gala and all the staff. I'm quite excited. In February this year was my 1-year anniversary of being completely free of cancer and cured. So thank you. I'm very, very grateful to God and to my doctors and science and my beautiful wife, Christine, my incredible sister, Amaji. And thank you all. I'm excited to still be here with you for a long, long time. So the title of my talk is actually, Can Our Own Genes Make Us Younger? My first question is, what beliefs do you have about aging? Have you even thought about this? Because this is a very important question. If you've ever seen a picture like this, it represents an iceberg. And at the very top of the iceberg is a little bit. And there's actually the majority of it is under the water that you don't see. And in terms of our own minds, our conscious mind is a very little part of actually the processing power of our mind. The majority of it's our subconscious mind. And in our subconscious mind are our beliefs. And as this saying is down here, beliefs lead to behaviors. This is Dr. Richard Bandler. He's one of the co-founders of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP. The beliefs reside in the subconscious mind. And beliefs lead to behaviors. Now, here's an example of how powerful beliefs are. This young man, Roger Bannister, 25-year-old man, in 1954, he ran a mile in less than 4 minutes. First time recorded in our history. The time was 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. Sub 4-minute mile. Up until that point, people did not believe that this was possible. So prior to 1954, one person in 1954 ran a 4-minute mile, a sub 4-minute mile. Look at now. Over 4,000 people have done it. Because the belief changed. All of a sudden, people believed we can run a mile in less than 4 minutes, and now it happens all the time. High school kids break the 4-minute mile. So that's how powerful beliefs can be. So, is it possible that we can actually live a lot longer than we think? I'm going to say the answer is yes. Did you know in 2015, 451,000 people were over 100 years old on this planet? By 2050, it's predicted almost 4 million people will be centenarians, over 100 years old. So it's really something to consider in terms of your own future. The question is, do some people have good genes? You've heard that before probably. Well, we are almost all genetically identical. 99.9% or more of our genes are identical in all people. In terms of a prayer for world peace, this is one of my offerings, that we really are all the same. And so I would say no, it's not about good genes. Do you believe that you have a choice in how you age? Very important question. What are your beliefs? Here's two women that are both 80 years old. The woman on the left clearly is doing something different than the woman on the right. It's not her genes, okay? She probably lives a very different life than the woman on the right, but they're both the same age, same number of years on the planet. So do your genes control you? Another important question that you have to think about, because many of you, whether you know it or not, believe your genes control you, and we need to change that belief. We need to put a new belief into our subconscious. Would you prefer to choose how you age? Would you like to have more say in your aging? Would you like to be younger? Would you like to decide your health more? Very important question. I'd venture to say, because you're here, the answer is yes. I'm going to talk to you today about something I called scientific empowerment. I want to empower your mind with concepts in science that actually give your power back to you. This is a quote from the great Mahatma Gandhi. Your beliefs become your thoughts become your words Words become actions, actions become habits. Habits become values, and your values become your destiny. But where does it start? It starts with your beliefs. Your belief system is critical in terms of what you manifest in your life. And I have longer talks on that. I'm not going to go into that more today, but you need to understand that as a basis for what you believe about your own aging. A lot of what I'm going to teach you, I've learned. I teach and I train in a Japanese martial art called Aikido. This is Chiba Sensei. My sensei passed away just a little over a year ago. I'm very grateful to him. This is my beautiful wife, Christine, and me with our teacher. But I've learned a lot through this art that I want to share with you through science. Have you seen this symbol before? Yin-yang. This comes from Taoism way, way back in China. Many different interpretations about balance and opposing forces and harmony. I want to use it in the sense of our mind and our body need to be synchronized. If you want to have an effect on your aging and your health, how you think about it and what you put in your body and how you act in your life all have to harmonize. Okay, so this symbol is very important. So I want to talk about some beliefs about aging that probably are somewhere in your psyche and you may or may not even know it. And it's important for you to know about them so that you can put different beliefs into your body and your mind. You've heard of this man probably, Charles Darwin on the left, have you? On the Origin of Species, he wrote a book. He's credited with a theory for the mechanism of evolution. Have you heard of this man on the right, Alfred Russel Wallace? Some of you have, most of you have not. Well, both of them came up with a very similar theory about how evolution occurs. And Alfred Russel Wallace actually sent a fully written paper to Charles Darwin, which really accelerated Charles Darwin's desire to get his theory out there because Wallace already had the theory written up. And what happened was they actually, a month later, 1858, it was presented and then published in 1859, they jointly published a paper. And actually, Wallace's work was first on the tendency of species to form varieties, and then Charles Darwin wrote an abstract, a short part, and it's about the varieties, about natural selection occurring. Okay, but together they made the theory and was presented. Wallace's name quickly fell off the theory, as you know, because you haven't heard of him. The theories were relatively the same, but there were some key differences that I want to explain to you. And this will all make sense shortly, too. Natural selection within species. You've heard of that, probably. Survival of the fittest. This is Darwin's theory. Competition. There's competition amongst the species to pass on DNA. Okay? Now, Wallace had a similar theory, but his was based more in species adapting to their environment. He also said that the weakest in a population get eliminated. That's very different than saying survival of the fittest, and I hope you can hear the difference there. In the Wallace version, anyone can strive to improve. Anyone can make themselves stronger so that they survive. They don't have to be originally the best or the fittest initially. So the world we live in is a Darwinian world, okay? Wallace's contribution was taken out. It's a world of competition, okay? Because that's where that theory is. Wallace's is a world of cooperation. Had his part stayed in the theory, we might be focused a lot more on cooperating and helping everyone be great rather than only the few great ones make it. Okay, so that's one belief right there. Belief number 2 is called genetic determinism. This is a theory that everything we are, our character, our behavior, what we do, is all predetermined by our genes. Okay, not by environment, not by individual choice, not by culture, not by diet, anything. It's simply the genes you're born with, and that's called genetic determinism. Now, you've probably heard of these two men, scientists, great scientists, Watson and Crick, James Watson, Francis Crick. 1953, they published the structure of the DNA molecule, deoxyribonucleic acid. The double helix is shown here on the left, and this is them looking at their model. A few years later, in 1962, they got a Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. James Watson, Francis Crick, also Maurice Wilkins, another great scientist that worked on the structure of DNA. Also, Rosalind Franklin had a huge contribution. She's a brilliant X-ray crystallographer. She passed away before the Nobel Prize was given. But I want to include her because I really believe in equality in science, and she doesn't seem to get the same notoriety as they do, but she did a ton towards the structure of DNA. So there's my Nobel Prize for the 4 of them rather than the 3 men. Central dogma. 1957, Francis Crick came out with a theory he called the central dogma. The central dogma says that our DNA houses the information for who we are. That DNA information is passed to RNA, which is passed to protein. What he said was it's a unidirectional, one-directional transfer. Here's another picture. So DNA is what's called transcribed to RNA, which gets translated into protein. The information is here, passed to here, passed to here. He originally said it could not pass, information could not pass in the reverse direction, okay? He had to modify part of it later as more science came out, but essentially this is what he said. Now this theory, central dogma, as well as genetic determinism, predicts that every gene we have produces a protein. It's a one-to-one relationship. Both of these say this will happen. Well, the proteome is a group of all the proteins in our body. The number keeps growing as more and more science realizes the immense amount of different proteins in our cells. But there's somewhere between 250,000 and a million. Some say 2 million. You know, there's a huge, I put a big range here on purpose. But nevertheless, let's say there's 500,000 proteins, different proteins in our body. The DNA sequence, all of the human genome was actually mapped. When I was in graduate school, this was a huge project, billions of dollars, 20 years, tons of labs worked on this. What they came out with was there is somewhere around 23,000 human genes in us. Okay? That's a big number. It's not a huge number. It's not 500,000. It's not a million. So immediately, genetic determinism and the central dogma have a problem. And those scientists really weren't happy. They expected there would be hundreds of thousands of genes to explain our complexity, okay? I put in this because I don't know if you ever... I love that rut-row. I mean, this was a big shakeup in science that there were so few genes, actually. And this is Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Anyway, when we look at what dogma actually means, a dogma is a point of view or a tenet put forth as authoritative without adequate grounds. No grounds behind a dogma. It's a theory. All of these things I have coming onto this slide right now are in conflict with the central dogma that Crick put out in 1957, starting with epigenetics, which I'm going to talk about a lot today. He says in his own words, okay, so in 1988, Francis Crick writes a book, and he says he called it the central dogma. He wanted to suggest this new assumption was more central and more powerful. It was a theory. There was no science to back the central dogma, and yet it formed the future of molecular biology and biotech up until today. Now, it keeps being refuted, but my point is it's in your psyche. There's no longer any doubt we need to replace the central dogma. It's been the foundation of molecular genetics and biotech since the 50s. It was a theory. There was absolutely no science to back it up. And he never said there was, but it became like this huge thing in science. So the reason I brought up these two limiting beliefs are for you to be able to think about and address these things, because whether you know it or not, this has been coming from science and the media for a long, long time. The first limiting belief is in the Darwinian view, evolution favors the best by birth. That means you're born how you're born, and that's as good as it gets. Okay? That's not true. The second is genetic determinism, which says your birth genes determine who you are. I'm here to tell you they do not, okay? You have huge amount of potential in you, and it's not based in the genes you were born with, okay? Your genes were a gift from your parents. What you do with them's up to you, and I'm going to go into that a lot more right now. But we have to address the beliefs we have about genetics. First, we have to even know what they are, and that's what I'm helping you see today. If we want to be in charge of our health, if we want to be in charge of our aging process and our longevity, we have to have accurate beliefs about what is possible. So, in Japanese, it's called shoshin. We use this in Aikido. It means beginner's mind or first mind. I'm asking you for the next half hour or so, open up your mind. In the beginner's mind, there's so many possibilities. Experts, it's very hard to teach an expert new things unless they're very open. So you adopt a mindset called beginner's mind. So I'm asking you, just open your mind to what I'm going to tell you, because there's a lot more potential than you may know about in science. So I'm going to talk about genetics versus epigenetics, or gene expression. You've already heard some of the speakers start to bring up this concept of epigenetics. Epigenetics means above genetics. It's a higher order control of our genes. So DNA is our genome. All of these genes, 23,000 genes, comprises what's called our genome. What it really is, it's a storing of information. I put here on the slide a hard drive. The DNA stores information, just like the hard drive on the computer stores information. DNA stores information really well. They've already used artificial DNA to store information. And if you look here, 100 million hours of high-def video can be stored in a cup full of DNA. That's every film and every TV show ever created in high-def can be stored in a little cup of DNA. It's a very potent storage source. But that's what it is. It's storage. So a hard drive for the computer, nobody thinks that the hard drive is the computer, right? You need an operating system. You need software to be able to access all that information in the hard drive. The same is with our cells. Our DNA has a very complex series of interactions that actually allow the cell to access the information stored in the DNA. And a lot of that has to do with the cell interacting with the environment, and the cell has to perceive its environment. So I could take two people, put you in the same exact room, and somebody would be happy and elated, and the other person could be really scared. And that perception would then affect actually the genes you chose in that moment. But also, the cell has the same idea. You see, perception is very important. And all of those things together decide the gene expression, or the epigenetics. This says genes don't turn themselves on and off. When a product is needed from a gene, a signal from its environment actually activates expression of the gene. Genes do not turn themselves on and off. It's not the job of a gene, okay? It's the job of the cell interacting with the environment to choose genes. What epigenetics is this, exactly this: environmental signals interacting with cells to select their gene expression. And the epigenome is the collection of all these tags, or marks that they're called, that are on your DNA that are determining which genes are on and off, and to how and to what degree. And that's an infinite possibility, okay? There's 23,000 genes. There's millions of possibilities for the epigenome. It's a much more potent and important part of our health and longevity. Epigenetics is modifications of the genome that don't change the sequence of the DNA, okay? So we're not talking about changing the specific code in the DNA at all. We're talking about modifying how the genes are used. It's very different. Now, one gene can make up to 1,000 or more proteins. Did you know that? It's nowhere near 1-to-1. 1,000 proteins or more from one single gene. That leaves a huge amount of possibility, right? So 23,000 genes, through the process of gene expression, produces somewhere upwards of 1 million or more proteins from that small number of genes. Now here's an example. They're actually studying this in the ENCODE project and Phantom, and what this slide says is only 2% of our DNA codes for genes. 80% of our DNA codes for switches. Things that turn genes on and off. Much more of our DNA is involved in the process of determining our health and longevity than actually the genes. And there's a little cup down there. It says there is no junk DNA. What that means is science used to say is most of our DNA junk because they only found 23,000 genes. The answer is no. Our DNA is very important, and it doesn't have to code for a gene to be important. Here's an example. The Roman alphabet that forms our language has 26 letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? You take those letters and you form words, and you can make English, right? Did you know that there's actually 131 languages, and its number is growing, that use those 26 letters to make the language? And this is like our genes, okay? Our genes are like the letters, and then gene expression. The gene expression is like all those languages. There's so much potential in your DNA. And here's a visual description, okay? So a caterpillar goes into a cocoon phase, becomes a butterfly. They're the same exactly DNA, okay? This DNA has not changed. The gene expression has changed a lot, the epigenetics. It's a great visual display, and I have a funny version of this. So the butterfly gets pulled over and gives his driver's license, where the caterpillar's still on there. He said, that's an old photo. But this is like the epitome of epigenetics, and I thought it was a funny way to see it. That's a science joke, but a good one. So all of our tissues, all our organs in our bodies have the same exact DNA. But look how differently they come out. The heart, the lungs, hugely different functions, different cell types from the same exact chromosomes. Okay? The liver. These are all identical twins, all of our organs, but they use their DNA completely differently. And this is the process of epigenetics. So what affects our gene expression? Essentially everything. It's important to really think about this slide, okay? How you eat, whether you eat well, whether you don't eat well, determines gene expression in your body. Emotional responses, happiness, sadness, thinking, thoughts we think, sun exposure, smoking, very bad for gene expression. Exercise is really good for gene expression. Whether you do meditation or breathing or yoga or chanting, any kind of mindfulness, very positive for gene expression. But everything we're doing is affecting our DNA. And our microbiome, our 70% of our immune system's in our gut here. There's a huge amount of activity there. The numbers are kind of all over the map, so I gave you a range. There's 100 trillion bacteria, 300 trillion viruses in our gut, which is producing millions of different genes and a massive amount of gene expression. But the bottom line is it has a huge effect on our health and longevity as well. So all that working together says that our environment interacting with our own human genes, we interact with our microbiome and our virome in our gut and around our body. They're interacting with the environment. We're interacting with, you see, there's a huge thing going on, and all this is determining how healthy you are, how young you are. But the cool part is it's all controlled by us, okay? There are two scenarios. The first scenario is genes control your life, okay? And what that means is you're a victim to your DNA and your heredity. Do you like that theory? No, you don't, and it's not true. The second one is environment controls genes through interaction. You control your environment, you control your perceptions of your environment, and you are therefore a master of your genes. Do you like theory number 2? Okay, this one's true, and I'm going to keep giving you examples why it's true. But we're creating a new paradigm. Science is really opening its eyes to how important epigenetics is. That's why articles keep getting published, why your DNA isn't your destiny. Okay, and there was a big study that's described in this article. There's all kinds of articles. Genes have a memory. Your grandparents, okay, well, how they ate, how they breathed, what they thought, how they felt. All of those things mark their genes that are affecting you. And you don't have to go through those experiences to have the effects. And there's a lot of studies showing this. Here's one, Trait versus Fate, that came out in Discover. It's looking at your grandmother when she's younger, okay? And whether she went through a nurturing experience or traumatic experiences when she was younger, even as a baby, that put marks on her genes. And those were given to you when she was just a baby, okay? And there's many studies here, but what it's saying is, as these generations go on, there are marks on the DNA that get passed on. They're heritable. Epigenetic tags are heritable. They get passed on. So we're not even just talking about you, but your children in the future as well, in terms of how critical it is to learn about your gene expression. There's another study with Holocaust survivors, the horrific trauma of the Holocaust. But what it said was Holocaust survivors that went through the trauma of the Holocaust and later had babies, their children are predisposed to stress disorders, anxiety disorders, PTSD, but they weren't actually there in the camps. But the genes were marked in the parents, and it's passed on to the children, okay? But here's the good news. Genetics is written in pen, okay? You're essentially born with your genes, and there may be minor modifications, but for the most part, the genes you're born with are your genes for life. Epigenetics, on the other hand, is written in pencil. We can actually erase these epigenetic marks and rewrite our epigenome. And that's very empowering. Here's an example, nutrigenomics. Have you heard of this? This is the interaction of what we eat with our DNA. So literally, if we all gave a blood sample right now, everybody ate an apple, 30 minutes later we took another blood sample, tremendous changes would have occurred in your bloodstream in the DNA, gene expression. Okay, it's happening all the time. So the choices of what you eat are always affecting your gene expression. Here's an example in mice, a really important epigenetic study. These are called agouti mice. They both have a genetic mutation. They're twins. These two mice are genetic twins. The mouse on the left has the gene and is expressing the mutation. It predisposes them to being overweight, to getting cancer, diabetes, being yellow. The mouse on the right, she has exactly the same DNA, but in utero, her mother was given extra vitamin Bs, B12, folic acid, a few others, and it completely shut down this mutation. Okay, and this mouse on the right actually gives birth to healthy babies too, so the tag stays through the next generation. So this is a very important thing for you to see in terms of how something as simple as vitamins, these methyl groups are involved in epigenetics. Here's another study. Dr. Dean Ornish at the Preventative Medicine Research Institute, he did a study with men that had early stage prostate cancer. And what he did was he changed their diet, changed their social interactions, gave them counseling, had them do meditation, mindfulness, and he changed the expression of over 500 genes. Just by doing that, it's a published study. They turned down genes that were causing cancer, and it turned up the healthier genes. So here's a very good human example. Less than 1% of all disease are caused by flawed genes. Okay, you have to hear these numbers. The National Cancer Institute itself on their website says inherited genetic mutations play a role in about 5 to 10% of cancers. Okay, that means 90 to 95% of cancer is not genetically linked. So when they always go right to family history, and family history has a lot more to do with epigenetics. Families tend to eat the same, families tend to think the same, have the same issues, emotional issues, live their life a similar way. If you open your mind to this concept, what it means is just because someone has a family history of something does not mean you have to get it. That is not the truth. Okay, and I hope you can put that into your mind. You have much more freedom because this kind of fear can sell a lot of drugs and a lot of programs, but it is not the truth. Even the NIH has a special website, Genetics Home Reference. Only a small percentage of mutations cause genetic disorders. Most have no impact on health or development. Okay, so at least open your mind to the idea that this genetic concept is, yes, it does happen in certain cases, but the majority no. And when you see diseases rising or obesity rising at such a dramatic rate, it's way faster than the mutation rate could possibly be when mutation rates are down in the 5% or less. Okay, so that gives you a lot of power. You're not a victim of your DNA. Okay? You have the power to choose. And that's what this first part of my talk is leading to, and I want you to hear that and hear it well, okay? Your birth genes are your birth genes. They're great. You can do whatever you want with them. The mind is the power, okay? A great master said that, and the power of your mind to decide, to make choices in your life, to decide what you eat, decide how you think, decide what you believe. You can install new beliefs into your subconscious. You don't have to live with the ones that are already in there. All of this means we are in charge. You decide your mind, how you think, the thoughts you have, the beliefs you have, your body, your food, your supplements, you take exercise, you do any kind of mindfulness, you do all of these things determine your gene expression, and they're in your power. So I return to my original question. Can our own genes make us younger? One thing is, science is clearly after this answer, right? It's huge all over science and the media, the concept of being younger, immortality, whatever you call it, extended health. Is aging genetic is a very important question, because if aging were genetic and you believe the central dogma and genetic determinism, all those, you kind of get what you get, right? You're going to age like your parents. It's not true, and you got to free yourself of that concept because it's not accurate. There's all kinds of twin studies showing that genetically identical twins age very differently. And what it turns out to be, there was a whole paper done, there's many studies. Epigenetics is the key. Twins diverge in how they use their genes very quickly from the time they're born, and then by the time they're 50, you see very big differences in gene expression with genetically identical twins, okay? They don't age the same. If aging were genetic, controlled purely by genes, twins would look identical for their whole life, and they don't. And they don't act the same. Did you know this? Identical twins, even when they're born, have different fingerprints. That's a cool concept, isn't it? Because you think they look so same and they're the similar, and They don't even have the same fingerprint because they have different epigenetics, even at birth. So I want to talk to you about a science called age lock. Age lock is addressing the genetic origins of how and why we age. And it's an important thing for you to know that's possible because it's already being done. So aging, we're going to call it, one of the ways to define it is tissue damage exceeds tissue repair. And that causes age-related frailty. So the concept is when you're younger, you can run and scrape your knee and you heal really fast, And as we age, healing tends to slow down. That repair process tends to slow down. Well, what we know is it's controlled by gene expression. And we have say in our gene expression. I hope you're starting to get that from my talk, and I'm showing you scientific examples. Although I personally have lived this for myself, what I'm showing you is science, not my opinion. Age lock has shown that gene expression regulates the aging process. Now that should be very exciting to you based on everything I've told you because we can affect the gene expression which affects aging. So we're all aged differently, and this is a really neat statement. Your genes are yours alone, becoming more unique to you every day. Because of these epigenetic tags and because of how gene expression is based on everything you're doing, your genes are becoming more yours literally every day. And everybody ages uniquely because of that. Nobody has the identical set of tags on their DNA. So what age lock is doing is they're looking at how these genetic tags affect DNA and shape the aging process. And epigenetics, again, is the key. The gene expression and how genes are expressed over time is critical for your youth and your health. And this is a really neat statement. The life you live leaves its imprint on your genes. Okay, I want you to take that in. This is something that, if you just take a few things from my talk today, if you can get that everything you're doing is imprinting your DNA, and your DNA then, through that process of gene expression, is determining how healthy you are, that puts everything back in your court. So let's rewrite our own aging, okay? Because we're talking about epigenetics here. So this is a quote from Dr. Joseph Chang, who is the head of the age lock science. And what he's saying is, essentially, if cells are allowed to do what they do best, they're going to default to their natural state of youth. Okay, that's a very exciting statement, that our default state is actually youth. Aging, it turns out, is an active process. Things have to happen to age. It's not that aging naturally occurs. Okay, that's an important thing to learn. And he's a great, brilliant scientist and very compassionate. And I'm sorry I don't have the entire quote here, but it's actually on the slide. This was another study that just came out late last year. It says, aging is not inevitable. Sea urchins do not age. They found different classes of sea urchins, short, long, and medium live. Some live over 100 years and they stay young the whole time. So science is coming out with more and more of these concepts that aging is not an inevitable consequence of life. It's a possibility that the whole concept of retiring and, there's a lot of money to be made in the senior population if they're old, right? If they're young, that's another thing. So it's another thing you should really think about. You have way more say than you think. So there's a breakthrough discovery in age lock, what's called aging defense mechanisms. And these are mechanisms in our cells that protect us and keep us young. Aging defense mechanisms, when we're young, they protect our cells. And as we age, they start to break down. They stop working as well. The very exciting news is we can actually reactivate the aging defense mechanisms, and they can bring youth back into our body. And you see that. I mean, you look at that woman that's 80, she's very young physically for 80 years old, chronologically. The great news is aging defense mechanisms are controlled by gene expression. So we're back to our own empowerment here. The other thing that age lock has found is something called youth gene clusters. These are functional groups of genes that are associated with being young. And they're groups of genes, okay? There's not one aging gene. These run together in groups, 50, 100 or more. And it's a big job to find these, okay? So there's 23,000 genes. You need to find these youth gene clusters, or these aging-related supermarkers, they're also called. If you want to affect aging, you got to affect the right genes. the genes that are changing with age. And what ageLock's done is they have over 500 million data points already in the gene expression library, and it's growing all the time. It's the biggest database in the world for aging, but it's a big process to find these aging genes. And what happens is, this is called an Affymetrix chip. And on this little chip, you can put all the human genes, okay, or all the mouse genes, whatever you're studying. This allows a lot of power. You know, even when I was in school, we pretty much looked at one gene at a time. But now we can look at the whole human genome all at once. And it produces what's called a DNA microarray, all right? And from that, you can look at a portion of the genes and produce what's called a heat map. And the heat map gives us a visual display of gene expression. So genes that are turned down more are usually blue or sometimes green, a cooler color. Genes that are turned up are red, yellow somewhere in the middle. But you get a visual display of how all these genes are being expressed, because each one of these little lines represents a gene. So what we can do is we can look at heat maps of young and old gene expression. Healthy skin has a certain pattern of gene expression. It gets reversed, almost reversed, as skin ages, all right, in terms of many, many genes on the youth gene cluster. So what ageLock does is ageLock identifies these youth gene clusters. It then targets them with natural ingredients and resets them back to the state when we're young. It's a very powerful technology. So here's an example of a youth gene cluster, and all these colors represent, this would be 5 genes in this youth gene cluster. Now, normally there's more, 50 to 100, and they all have a certain level of gene expression when we're younger. As aging occurs, it changes a lot, okay? Genes that are usually turned up often will be turned down. Genes that are turned down can be turned up. Changes happen a lot in our youth genes, and ageLock's job is to return our gene expression back to youthful gene expression. And it's a balance, okay? It's not just about turning a gene on or one off, or it's about turning down these genes that are accelerating aging and turning up genes that are preserving youthfulness. It's kind of like, one way to think about it's this room, you know, there's a certain temperature. Let's say right now we're in the young cell, okay? And the temperature's really nice, the lighting is good, sound is good, you're not hearing a lot of background noise. Everything is good, okay? Youthful, nice, youthful state. As aging occurs, the room might get a lot hotter. The lights might get too dim. You know, you might start hearing the air conditioning. All those things change over time, just like the gene expression does in the cell. And then as this little device here would regulate these things, we can literally change things back to how the room was when we were young, right? So then the temperature would come back to a great temperature, lights would be good, and that's the resetting we're talking about, resetting our genes. So literally, as we age, we have the same genes, but the patterns of gene expression in these youth genes keeps changing. And that's what's causing aging. And what ageLock's job does is return it back to youthful gene expression. Now, there's an example I want to show you. If you think about this, all of our cells have these scores of symphonies, you know, like Beethoven symphonies and Mozart, all these great symphonies. The cells have the score, but they interpret them differently. Just like if you had 50 different orchestras play a Beethoven symphony, they're all going to interpret it differently. Same thing with our cells. When we're younger, they interpret the score one way. And I'm going to play this for you. So this is how the cell would sound when it's young. So that's the finale of Beethoven's Fifth, which is incredible. And now, as aging occurs, okay, that score is still there, but the cell starts playing it differently, okay? So I'll play you this one. It's going to be a little different. See, it's same symphony, but it's out of tune now, it's slower. And this is what happens with the cell's gene expression as aging occurs. It's just not the same, but it's the same notes, it's the same score, okay? So what we do in ageLock is we return back to the way the score was played in youth, okay? So it comes back to the nice way the Berlin Philharmonic plays it. The cells have the ability to keep playing the youthful symphony. You just have to give them the right information. So that's a beauty. But I play the violin too, so I love these symphonies. I hope you like that example though, because it gives you also an audible way of seeing that our cells have that potential all the time. So the way that this works is quite interesting. They take all these natural ingredients, they put them through this age-lock filter, and that gives you, based on gene expression, what ingredients affect the genes in the way that you want. So it's really quite exciting. So when you look at this is young gene expression in a group of youth genes, okay? So the genes in the green are turned down more. The genes in the red are turned up, and every little line here is a gene. So this might be 50, 60, 70 genes, something like that. Look at the old gene expression pattern. Very different. The same exact genes, but those genes now are turned way up, and those are turned way down. It almost flip-flops the pattern when we're younger. And these are youth genes, so these are very, very important to be younger. What you do then is you try different ingredients, and you look for how they affect the gene expression. And if you look at this one, ingredient number 4 takes the gene expression pattern of old gene expression plus ingredient 4, dramatically returns it back to the gene expression pattern of youth. And this is very, very possible. Gene modulation experiment. This is what I want you to see. You have the power to turn your genes back to how they were when you were younger. So what happens is you affect these youth gene clusters at the gene level, which then increases productivity of the cell, and then you feel younger, you look younger. It just depends which genes we're targeting throughout the body. And many of these have been, age-lock already exists for inside-outside face, neck and décolleté, weight management, body, skin, cellulite, cellular energy and cleansing, overall body youth. These are internal, those are external. There's a prebiotic coming. This science is well underway. And I want to give you just a little on a few of them because it's really neat to see how potent this is. So overall body youth taken internally, it's about youth span, okay? And what we're talking about is being able to live your life longer, younger, right? Not talking about just extending life. You don't want to live longer, older. You want to live long and be young, healthy, active, energetic, a good young life for a long time. That's the target here. And so what we're doing here is we're targeting these aging defense mechanisms. And what happens is they work throughout our body, which gives you dramatic response. Okay, so here's a visual. So I've told you, gene expression is actually controlling these aging defense mechanisms. So here's the visual. Okay, the cell, DNA in the cell is being expressed a certain way. When we're young, these aging defense mechanisms are very strong. Okay, and if you look at them, they're quite potent. There's 6 of them are affected in this particular supplement: antioxidant defense, detox and stress response, DNA protection and repair, tissue renewal, metabolic regulation, as well as inflammatory balance. So these are potent categories that work throughout our body. As we get older, they stop working as well. They stop protecting the cell like they should. And then what that allows is for aging aggressors to take a toll on our body and on our life because they're not being protected anymore by the aging defense mechanisms, and the cell takes that toll. What happens is when you positively modulate the gene expression, it reactivates the aging defense mechanisms when you target the right genes, and from there, you start affecting throughout the body systems. It's really quite dramatic, which is what I wanted you to see. So we're talking about cellular health, cardiovascular health, immune health, brain health, nervous system, digestive tract, bone health, all over the place. Metabolic regulation, cardio strength, as well as muscle, even eyes and skin. Okay, so all these things get affected when these aging defense mechanisms get reactivated. And I wanted to show you the gene expression patterns are profound. So these are thousands of genes here, okay? And the same pattern I told you, red's turned up, blue's turned down, yellow's in the middle. And we look at old controls, just normal aging. And then when you go with the age-lock profile, looks like that. And look at that. That's the positive control of the younger state, or it's a caloric-restricted state, which is shown to reverse and slow down aging. So this is quite an amazing gene expression profile, and it shows in the responses. There's a study that I got a slide of with unpublished results so far that are study in progress that's been really profound. But they did functional MRIs of the brain, and it showed improved activity in attention, memory, error detection, as well as cognitive tests, memory, verbal fluency, and mood, just by taking something internally that works on these aging defense mechanisms. So it plays out. What I'm wanting to show you is that when you affect the gene expression, it shows up in your body, okay? And then just a couple more things. Cellular energy and cleansing is another internal that I wanted to show you because the gene expression patterns are amazing. So this is the set of youth genes for cellular energy. This works in mitochondria. Have you heard of those? They're little batteries in our cells. Very important as well in the aging process. Well, there's genes here from the mitochondria as well as cellular purification mechanisms in our cell. As we age, you can see the gene expression pattern changes dramatically in those youth gene clusters. Well, look at what agelock's able to do is return our cells. That's like over 90% resetting of the genes back to a youthful state. It's quite a profound technology. I just recently wrote a paper with Dr. Mark Bartlett, who is head of the internal agelock science. I ran a clinical trial with the San Francisco Fire Department, 20 volunteers, and we used agelock and another antioxidant supplement. But in the 90-day study, we showed that we raised antioxidant scores, but we also increased their energy, their ability to sleep, mental acuity, even sexual vitality in this study. And so I'm happy we just got our paper written up, and it really came out quite interesting and very positive results. At the Oregon Tiger Sanctuary, I run the veterinary program, and we're using agelock on all of the primates, tigers, lions, leopards, cougars, dogs, cats respond very well. We have some of the oldest living tigers in captivity from our agelock protocol. And then skin, I'm just going to show you what's been learned. Skin, so these are youth gene clusters in our skin. It's all the same concept. Find the youth genes and affect them back to youth, okay? So there are youth gene clusters in our skin for skin structure and firming, pigmentation, hydration, cell turnover. What they lead to is properties of our skin at the gene expression level. Lines and wrinkles, skin structure, and all kinds of things. Firming, color spots, uneven tone, hydration, cellular turnover. And that leads to things like texture, radiance, pore size. So if you affect the youth genes, and you can see one of the profiles here, you get a dramatic effect. Same thing in weight management. You look at a healthy twin and an overweight twin, you look at their gene expression. What happens in the fat tissue, they're expressing their genes very differently. So the study showed that fat regulation was changed in the overweight twin as well as muscle protein synthesis drops. So what agelock does there is it does the same process, but it targets genes that decrease fat storage and genes that increase fat burning. And so you target metabolism, lean muscle, and appetite control through gene expression. And it works really well. Next is coming a prebiotic agelock for the gut. So it's really quite exciting. The crux of what I want to tell you today in closing is the answer has been inside us all along. There's this search for the fountain of youth and something magical and everything. Our own genes provide our youth if they're given the right information. In other words, our cells always have the young symphonies, okay? The beautiful melodies are still there, even if maybe you're not feeling it right now or you're not looking it. You can. Your cells still know how to be young if you give them the right information. And a lot of things that are being talked about today are supporting your gene expression going back to when you're younger. So in closing, you are in charge. Your mind and your body, what you choose to eat, interacts with your DNA. Your environment, you control it. Interacting with your DNA is determining whether you're going towards youth and longevity or whether you're aging. It's truly up to you. So I want to say in closing, can our own genes that make us younger? Absolutely. You can reach me on Facebook, please, at any time you want for questions. Just go to my name and friend me or write me. Christine and I have a table. We're going to do free demos with agelock skincare today. And we're going to show you something neat now, too. We're going to scan your antioxidants. We're going to do this with Dr. Gala. So thank you very much. I deeply appreciate your time today, and I hope that was helpful.